I'm Luke Powery, and I'm here with Joel Fleishman for the Duke Centennial Oral Histories program. Joel, it's a privilege to sit with you this afternoon and to hear from you.
Well, I feel very honored to be chosen for this. It is not used to it, but nonetheless, I'll get used to it pretty fast.
Great, I'm sure you will. We know that you came to Duke in 1971. Could you speak a little bit about how you came to Duke and describe your relationship with former North Carolina Governor and Duke President Terry Sanford? How were you first connected to him, and what motivated you to join him at Duke?
I met Terry Sanford when I was a sophomore at Chapel Hill.
Oh, wow.
He lived in Fayetteville, which is my home.
Oh, okay.
And some of my friends who knew him, I didn't know him at all. Some of my friends said, you know, he's now the head of the Young Democrats in North Carolina, and since you, Joel, are brings visiting speakers to Chapel Hill, I was the head of the Carolina Forum.
Okay.
He said, I think that Terry Sanford could help you get some speakers to come. And I said, well, why not? So I got to know him. We ultimately became very good friends, and it was that introduction. Basically, he did in fact help me with the speakers, but I think it's fair to say that we took a liking to one another. Mm. And when he decided to start running for office, I signed up for his campaigns. So okay. he was, you know, he made a sort of a quick try at running for, I believe at that point he was governor, and then dropped out at that point.
Okay.
But then the campaign that he ultimately stayed in was the campaign for governor that was elected. The Democratic nomination was, I think, if I remember correctly, in 1959.
Okay.
And that was the election in which he beat Dr. Beverly Lake,
okay,
who was ardently in favor of separate schools, essentially.
Okay. Okay.
And he won the Democratic nomination, and then went on to win the election in 1960, I think it was. So it could have been 61, I'm not sure exactly. Whatever, he won the election, and then I had been at Yale, where I was a faculty member and doing administration up there. I went back to Yale after the campaign. Okay. And then he decided, well, maybe he should recruit me. I was a lawyer, and at least I had a law degree in any event. Right. Whether that makes you a lawyer or not, I'm not sure. I know too many people that it doesn't make you a good lawyer. I don't know whether I was a good lawyer or not, but I enjoyed it. In any event, I went back to Yale, and then next thing I know, you know, he is doing all other kinds of things. I don't know whether I said that he hired me to be legal assistant to the governor in the governor's office.
Oh, okay.
And so I was a legal assistant to him when he was governor, starting in 1961 until 1965, when he left office. And when he left office, he went back to his law practice. I went back to Yale. And the next I heard from Terry Sanford was when I was up there at Yale doing a variety of kinds of things. One of the things that I did was working with the president of Yale to provide education for disadvantaged, underachieving students. I ended up serving as the director of the Yale Summer High School. Yale Summer High School identified young people from all over the country, of all races, but focusing a lot on people of color. And I ran that up there. When I was up there, that's what I did. Meanwhile, Terry Sanford got appointed to be president of Duke when the trustees elected him in the fall of 1969. And then he began trying to recruit me to come down here. In Terry Sanford's speech of inaugural address, he said he wanted to create a program that would train young people about going into politics, working for government, working for nonprofit organizations, and so on. He made two proposals in his speech. Well, that was one of them, and I don't remember what the other one was. All I know is that he then, after he got settled in the job, he said he wanted me to come down and head up the effort, which ultimately became the Sanford School of Public Policy. And I was the first director of it, starting in 1971. I directed it until 1963, when he had found something else for me to do, which was to run Duke's capital campaign for the whole university, the capital campaign for the arts and sciences and engineering.
Okay.
Engineering got in there because one of the trustees was on the board of engineering school at Duke, and he insisted that the campaign not just be for arts and sciences, it had to include engineers. So that's a quick, I hope, history of how I got involved with Terry Sanford. Yeah. And, we had a wonderful relationship. I think everybody that worked for him felt that they had wonderful relationships with him. He was easy to approach, had a great sense of humor. He liked to go out and meet with people all over the state and talk to various clubs and everything else. I didn't have the slightest interest in doing that, frankly. Right. So while I was working I was his legal assistant when he was there. I didn't do the things that he liked to do, but that's fine because there's enough to do for two people, at least two people. So, but in any event, going back to my beginning stay at Duke, they started it as an institute, which I infelicitously called the Institute for Policy Sciences and Public Affairs. Well, it turns out that most people didn't know what policy sciences was, and so that name lasted 1 year.
Okay, only 1 year.
only 1 year, and we quickly renamed it the Institute for Public Policy Studies. Okay. And it's now the Sanford School of Public Policy Studies.
Wow. When did the name become? When did it become the school, Sanford School?
I think, if I remember correctly, it was 2009.
Okay, so more recent times.
Yeah.
Okay. What linked to thinking about the Institute's movement to the public policy school? What was the vision ultimately for the Institute that is now the Sanford School of Public Policy?
Well, I should now add in another increment. While I was at Yale was trying to do something like this, and I actually think it was the Ford Foundation that financed two reports that I did. They were book-length reports, like 300 pages. Wow. And it was, what do you do about education, pre-work education for people who wanted to prepare themselves to work in government or run for office in politics, whatever. what do you do before they've ever done anything? And the second thing is, what do you do mid-career? So there were two separate reports. But I interviewed everybody in the country, literally. By that time, there were a number of schools, Harvard, Michigan, Minnesota, Texas, all had schools. By that time, meaning 1967, when Terry Sanford, that was slightly before Terry Sanford actually began serving as president of Duke.
Okay.
But and so I'd been interviewing people about what it is that an institute like this needs to do. And so it was not totally based on his friendship for me, I think, but because I had been doing all of this work, research on what do public policy schools do, basically. And by the time they came down here, I did know, I say so a good deal about that question. And I literally interviewed every faculty member at every public policy school in the country.
Wow.
And all of this was before I got asked to come to Duke. So I'd already done it. And in a sense, I was, I think, from their view, well prepared. And I think it did make a difference in terms of what we did. So I came down here in 71, stayed at Terry Sanford's home briefly until I found a place where I actually, which I bought, and I'm still living in the same house in Chapel Hill.
Okay.
So it was, and there were various aspects that came out of the research that I did that I thought were very, very relevant. Most schools of public policy recognize that you can't be a good policy analyst if you don't know something about economics. And most of the policy schools had courses in economics, in statistics, in decision analysis, in political analysis, all of those kinds of things. And we just, we, like everyone else, we modeled ourselves after what everybody else was doing.
Okay.
But we added to it in the things that I thought that other people were not doing. So that from the very beginning, we were, I think, the only public policy program that had year-long courses in ethics. We had courses in humanistic perspectives on public policy. We had, I don't know whether you ever run into Alex Harris here, who founded the Center, originally the Center for History and Public Policy. No, photography, public policy. He's a photography expert, and ultimately, it was instituted under his leadership into an institute that worked on bringing arts people into education, and really far out kinds of things like having classes in photography for blind people.
Oh, wow.
So it was, it was just an amazing kind. But the point I'm making is, that we were the first public policy school in the country that focused on ethics, year-long courses in ethics.
Okay.
And that still holds true. It was also the case that we designed a number of courses that combined classroom work at Duke with internship work, internship opportunities in Washington or elsewhere, in which you basically, the courses were year-long courses that started in January with a course on campus, followed up by an internship in Washington or New York or wherever the person was interested in, and then a semester in the fall that followed up on all of those. The package was classroom, real world, classroom, basically.
Okay.
And we had a number of courses that were designed just that way, so that students got the sense of what real life is in government, in nonprofit organizations, and so on. So that they were very different things. Then that was very different. Those characteristics were different from most other schools in the country.
Okay.
In the process of it, it's also the case that we focused on the quality of a person's teaching as being indispensable to being in the faculty. And one of the, I think it was the Ford Foundation has a program officer who was our visiting program officer when we got support from Ford. I didn't tell you, when I got appointed to run this, Terry Sanford says, now I want you to know the deal is you have to make enough money from other sources to start this organization. And once you've got the organization going and so have classes, we can provide tuition money to support what you're doing. So we started, I got a lot of experience in raising money at that point, which ended up lasting for quite a while. It was one of the reasons I ended up, as I said, when Terry Sanford decided to, when I stepped down as the director of the school, to draw me into running the capital campaign for the arts and sciences and engineering.
Right. You're a Renaissance man.
I don't,
in a lot of ways.
I've had to do things that I never would have thought I had to do, but I have to say everything was fun. And I enjoyed the fundraising side. I can't honestly say I didn't. But the truth of the matter is that it was a different twist on what I'd always done.
Right. Let me ask you, before I move into some further questioning about Sanford, how did you, because you were doing the research on these other public policy schools that had emerged, what drew you into that kind of research?
Oh, because Yale was interested in doing something like it.
Okay.
It did not have a public policy school.
Okay.
It still doesn't have a public policy school, but it does have a lot of courses dealing with the things that the public policy schools have, and so that was the reason I did it. I didn't do it only because I was interested.
Okay.
I did it because that was what preparing Yale to do what it wanted to do. I needed to do.
Okay.
And so all of those reports, the interviews and those reports were all done before I came to Duke.
Okay.
I think it gave him ammunition for why they should recruit me, because at that point I knew a lot about what all the other public policy schools in the country were doing.
Right. So Terry Sanford, he's a key individual in Duke history, and obviously we've heard some about him already, but I think we'll begin with him. What kind of leader was he?
I have to say, the most amazing leader I've ever known. His favorite expression was outrageous ambitions.
Right.
It was coined during the course of the campaign that I ended up leading. I didn't think it was a great idea, frankly, but he did, and that was all that counted. But it was Terry just could not take no for an answer, whether you were working for him, or whether he was trying to get money from you, or whatever. He was absolutely passionate about it. He was the best salesperson that any university could have had at that point. He came to the picture. I'll tell you an anecdote, true story. The first meeting I attended after I came down here in '71 was a meeting in his office for his sort of kitchen cabinet, of which I was one because I'd known him for a long time at that point. And he said, Duke is a great university. He started out by saying, but not many people know about it. He said, it's known in certain parts of the country, the Middle West, some of the major metropolitan cities, but people don't know anything about it. He said, and I've decided that what Duke needs most of all is to be known to more people. So he said, and I've come up, the idea I have for getting that done is I think we should buy a Sunday insert in the New York Times Sunday magazine, colored photographs of all of our faculty members, descriptions of what they teach, what they do research on and everything else. And everybody around the table, including me, said, you can't do that. That's so tacky. They said, that is not what good universities do. We all said it, everybody. He said, well, we're going to do it. And so for $25,000, which is what it cost us to buy that insert on a Sunday, we did it. So keep in mind the fact that in 1969, before Terry came here, when he got here, the endowment that Duke controlled, not talking about the Duke Endowment, a separate foundation, I'm talking about Duke University, had less than $100 million. Wow. The weakest of the secondary school, private schools in the country had that much money in endowments. Wow. But Duke didn't. So he started from a situation in which they didn't have much in the endowment. And it was the fact that Mr. Duke did create an endowment, a large portion of which yields income that comes to Duke. That was part of the idea. And so it was a situation in which that's why in 1963, the new chancellor came in, Ken Pye, wonderful guy, great chancellor, said, you can't go on like this. Duke doesn't have the money to finance the university. The bulk of the money is coming from tuition and the modest amount we're getting from the Duke Endowment. He said, you got to run a campaign. That was the motivation for deciding in 1963 that Duke had to start running campaigns. It had had 2 campaigns before Terry Sanford, both of which failed. Neither one of which achieved their objectives. And so he determined that was the campaign that I got asked to run, and ended up running it. Took us 9 years to get it done, but we did in fact raise $500 million, which was a large step forward. Mind you, starting from less than $100 million in Duke's own endowment in '69, and then annual the money being generated over the years and money on money given, the endowment today is, I think, somewhere around $15 or $16 billion. Wow. Built up over time.
Over time.
But nonetheless, and it was, I have to say that it was an extraordinary experience because I'd never raised money. I'd raised money from foundations to help start the Sanford, what is now the Sanford School. I had not any prior experience with that. And, it's also of interest that when I took over that campaign, Duke had 0 records on what our alumni did. They had a list of the names of the alumni, and usually had up-to-date addresses for them, but not always. But they didn't know anything about which alumni could actually afford to make gifts to the university, because they didn't have any data on it. And so, I found it necessary at that point to go around the country, go to different cities where I had friends whom I'd gotten to know over the years and who knew something about the local communities, to tell me who the alumni were, which ones that we should think about approaching for significant gifts. Extremely helpful. And the friends were always willing to do it. But I would sit down, give them a copy of the IBM printout with nothing but the names, and say, who are these people?
Right.
Just in any event. It's an unusual way to raise money, but it worked. And and we did make the money the goal in the campaign, and it was the first campaign that Duke ran that was successful.
Wow. And that was the one linked to outrageous ambition?
That was the one that was the outrageous ambitions one.
Wow. Okay.
And Terry was great about it. Terry had no, if he wanted to get money from people, he would have breakfast for them at home. I attended I don't know how many breakfasts in which he cooked breakfast. He had different dishes named for individuals. So there was Eli Evans was one of his disciples, as I was, and he ended up. Eli got, I think, eggs named for himself. So eggs Eli. I got grits Joel. I didn't mind it because I like grits, but in any event, lots of breakfast, lots of dinners at his home, and what's more, he was gregarious and wasn't hesitant about he was acting. He got to be known as one of the best governors in the country when he was governor. He put North Carolina on the education map more than anybody else, probably 30 or 40 years before him. So he was widely known, and he got to know the governors in other states, including Georgia, and he got to know the people in Georgia in the campaign there who raised money. And so and he was, everything I think about who raised the money for the Duke Business School. It was Terry Sanford himself who raised it because of his contacts with the people he got to know who worked for the governor of Georgia and who and that ended up getting one of the prime donors in Georgia to endow the business school at Duke.
Wow.
But in any event, he was always willing to do it. And that was one of the reasons that he was as successful as he was not reluctant to ask for money, and was very shrewd about recruiting rich people for the board, from whom he could expect to receive gifts for Duke in later years. So it's an extraordinary story. It's not just, but I started to say, outrageous ambitions was his motto, for example. But the fact of the matter is, he was a very gracious, extremely good politician, developing friends all over the country. And one of the other things that we did under his leadership is just accidentally happened was we ended up creating we didn't have any idea that we were going to create a journalism program at Sanford. We still don't have a journalism school,
right?
But we do have a journalism program. That program started because very distinguished editor by the name of Gene Patterson. Gene Patterson was the editor of the Atlanta papers.
Okay.
And Kay Graham, the wealthy individual who owned the Washington Post, persuaded him to come and work at the Washington Post. Well, he and Kay Graham did not get along very well. And so he decided he needed to go somewhere else. So he knew of Terry Sanford in large part because of Terry's involvement with the governor of Georgia. And so he said, Gene said, I think I'll go talk to Terry Sanford to see maybe he has something to do for us. He came to see Terry Sanford. Terry said, of course we will do something. Go talk to Joel. And so he talked to me, and I said, we would love to have you teach our first course in journalism. And so the first course of journalism at Duke was taught by Gene Patterson, who was one of the most famous journalists in the country because of the prizes that he had won, covering segregation issues, all of those things. And he was absolutely amazing, and a wonderful guy. And unfortunately, he lasted only 1 year because one of his friends who owned the St. Petersburg Times decided he wanted him to come and take over his estate and be the mastermind with how they spent the money.
Okay.
So it's all because of Terry's fame, and also because he just worked amazingly. Once we got the journalism school, the journalism program going, it opened a whole nother door for us, which I will, if you ask me what's really different about Terry Sanford, what's really different is that we went out of our way to identify journalists, successful journalists on major national and international vehicles. At that point, it was mostly newspapers, but also later television. We built up something called the Duke program in communications and journalism, basically, where we brought down each year we would pick a group of about 20 or 30 of the leading journalists and ask them to come to Duke 4 times a year and to work with students and train faculty members. All because of the fact that what Gene Patterson got us going in that area, and it made all the difference in the world.
Wow.
But it's also related, I should say, and I don't know how we're doing on time, but
You're good.
are we doing okay?
Yes.
One of the other things that it led to here was really quite a major thing for Duke, and I think a major contribution. It was that under Terry's leadership, there was a premium put on getting the faculty off campus more involved with the areas they were professors in. Students, same thing. Get students off campus for internships, variety of sorts. Bring lots of individuals who were experts in something or the other, but not professional teachers, bring them to the faculty. So in a sense, it was opening the doors to do. Bring in practitioners. That was the motto. Bring in the practitioners. And if you look at the character, if you look at the dimensions of the non-regular faculty members at Duke at this day, you've got, and most of the departments have at least as many practitioners on the faculty as they have regular academics.
Oh.
So in a sense, it was an attempt to freshen Duke's education by bringing on practitioners, both whether in business or in people who were social entrepreneurs in the private, nonprofit sector, all of those things.
Wow. Well, Sanford, I know, has had a huge impact as you're painting the picture here, and others who have been obviously follow him before him. In addition to Sanford, are there other individuals that you would name that you think have made a significant impact on the university?
Yeah, I think the most of the recent presidents we've had have made or are making significant impact. Dan was the one who put a major emphasis on strengthening the faculty, raising money for faculty salaries, raising money for graduate students. And we had never done a campaign that focused on that. Okay. But that was the whole campaign. Okay. I did not have to run it. Someone else had to run it. Right. But in any event, so it was a good example, of that. Nan was terrific. Dick Broadhead, again, absolutely wonderful president. Nan really is, I think of as being responsible for increasing the academic stature of Duke. Faculty and graduate students, PhD people. But it also, it's also the case that Dick Broadhead was responsible for the internationalization of Duke. So you got Terry became very popular when he was here. With the faculty, the students would go to the basketball games or the football games chanting Uncle Terry. That's what they called him.
Wow.
So that's what they chanted,
Right.
Uncle Terry, at the ball games. And the students loved him in large part. There's another anecdote that's true. Right after Terry, we had a problem with the previous president of Duke, whose name I'm blocking on, and there was a student demonstration, and out and in front of the chapel, students were out there and making trouble. One complaining about the then previous president, actually, and the students were. Terry walked out there, had a bullhorn, and he said, "I hear that all of you want to take over the Allen Building. Follow me." And he led the group of people said, "My door is open. Let's all go over there right now, and you can take over the Allen Building."
Wow.
I thought that was, but that's again the kind of audaciousness that Terry Sanford found very compatible with his own values and style of doing things.
Wow. Now, and outside of some of those individuals that you've named, are there particular moments in Duke's history that you believe are pivotal, have been pivotal?
I'm not sure anything leaps to mind. Obviously, the athletic successes that followed, which one would say the president didn't have much to do with, but it is the case that certainly with basketball and also probably with football, where the coaches were sufficiently outstanding that they ended up. You may have a better idea about this than I do. All I can say is that during Terry's administration and thereafter, the popularity of Duke seems to have grown. Now that may be a side function of Duke itself getting known better. And one thing I didn't mention earlier was thinking about the differences between what situation was when Terry got here and what happened afterwards. I told you already about the decision to buy a certain insert in the New York Times, right? That occurred in 1971. In 1965, when Terry decided to retire from the presidency, there was an article. There was an article in the Times, front cover picture of Duke students tossing frisbees around in front of the chapel, and the headline of the article was Duke, the hot college. We didn't have to pay for that.
Right.
But you think about that in comparison to what the situation was in '69 when Terry Sanford took over.
Right.
It was also reflected. I think the applicant pool at that point was less than 5,000. We're now used to the pool that's close to 40,000.
Right.
That too occurred between most of it, not all of it, between 1969 and 1985.
Wow. So it's
just
rapid. It's been a rapid.
You think about the money in the endowment, you think about the number of students, you think about the number of students as a reflection of how the better known aspect of Duke that was there because of Terry. And the frequency of comments about about Duke in the newspapers because of the work that all the journalistic people who were involved regularly as sort of visiting faculty members. All of those things create a package. The activists in business, activists in nonprofit organizations, all of those things come together, and you begin to see, and so many of them really did. I don't mean to say that Terry Sanford did everything that has happened. He didn't, but he did a lot that changed the atmosphere in the campus.
Right, right. As you look back, and I believe you've been at, well, definitely over 50 years here.
Yes, 53 years.
53 years. More than half of since Duke became Duke and the inventor of trust. And as we celebrate the Centennial, what makes you most proud of Duke as you reflect on your time here?
Duke's capacity to change things that needed to be changed, and I'm thinking about everything from representation of people of color, people from different nationalities, countries, ethnic groups, and everything else.
Yeah, I think that's right. Let's pivot to 2023. You taught your last class, that's what I've heard, at the age of 89.
The last regular class.
The last regular class. Okay. You're still teaching at the last regular class.
I'm still teaching. I still teach individuals if I choose to.
For sure.
And I still bring in the heads of nonprofit organizations and foundations and everything else.
Right.
And have seminars. That's teaching as well.
For sure, it sure is regular teaching. Can you say something about your perspective or feelings just about teaching and the Duke student body? I think some of that was already coming out just now, and just that. But then also, how has teaching and maybe the students changed in the last 50 years?
Well, I mentioned the main change has been the diversity. The diversity of background. Many more people of color, many more international countries represented. What's astonishing to me, it used to be the case that some students would go abroad for a semester abroad.
Right.
All students go abroad for a semester abroad now. It's literally the case. Wow. I mean, all the students I know end up going abroad, and my impression is that's true of everybody. And there's an openness to the other part of the rest of the world that was not here at that point.
Right.
I think there was a certain conservatism about people's desires to visit other countries, but it's certainly not the case now. And so that's a major change in the student body, as is the temperament of the student body. What's also really interesting to me is the way that the faculty at Duke, led by Vince Price, the president, has engaged with all of the various minority groups on campus, whether it's Jewish or Muslim or what have you, in a way that has encouraged people to think about and talk about differences. You know, you got the new provost, Alec, has a series of programs that focus on bringing in speakers to talk about controversial issues on all sides, and nobody is permitted to interrupt them. If people want to protest, they can begin a protest, but they're not allowed to stay.
Right.
That's a totally different way that other schools. You know, when you think about what's happened at Berkeley in California, NYU in New York, Penn, all of the Harvard, Yale, all of these places have had a really serious problem. Thank God we haven't had it yet.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to happen because I think the student body is basically different. And I think that the faculty is basically different. I think it's a faculty and a student body that is open-minded and yet understands that there are multiple sides to every question.
That's right. Yeah, that's good. There's something about the culture, the Duke culture here overall.
Which has been persistent. It's been there.
Right, yeah. So tell me about, so you're not regular teaching,
Right.
but you still are obviously engaged in many things. Could you speak to what are you engaged in currently?
Well, I'm 3 or 4 different projects.
Okay.
One of them basically is I've long felt, and I've talked to the president about it, as well as other senior administrators. The only academic program that's there that really relates to Jewish issues is the Center for Jewish Studies. I think that's the name of it.
That's right.
Actually, it's underfinanced in my view.
Okay.
It's got, compared to the other universities who are our competitors, which have multiples of, faculty members, 10 to 20 faculty members teaching that. We have basically only 3 endowed positions in that part of the university.
Right.
And one of the things that I've been encouraging the administration to consider is including in the new campaign getting support for some more positions in the Center for Jewish Studies.
Okay.
I feel it really needs to happen. I think and we need to have more courses dealing with things like that. All the more when you think about that against the background of what's happened in Israel at this point. It's really it's something that has become an international issue,
Right.
and whether it's historic or what other kinds of issues dealing with Jewish matters, that's something that needs to be fixed, I think. So I've spent time doing that, and am still spending time
Okay.
doing that, and I will be until we get some progress there made. But I think I'm making progress.
Okay.
In any event, another project that I'm involved with is the problem that, as a general matter, education in the United States has basically gotten rid of all teaching about citizenship, civics. I don't know, you're probably young enough so that
Yeah.
it was happened in your...
Yeah, we had it.
You had it. I had it in my going to school. I had courses with civics everywhere. There aren't any anymore. And so it happens that a couple of the foundations have put together support for an organization at Princeton that is basically working to revisit that question and get a number of courses that taught to students. Stanford is the one university that has taken it to the logical extreme, where it has created a university-wide course theme with different courses, actually, but every student is required to take a course about citizenship,
Okay.
U.S. citizenship, what it means, essentially. And I think that's something that worth working on, and there are two projects that I've been involved with that were really pioneered by students, actually. And what else? They are the main things. But there's, oh yes, and the third one is the fact that public policy schools do a reasonably good job of teaching economics, statistics, decision analysis, and we do ethics, also studies on humanistic perspectives, the arts, and so forth, bringing them involved. But it's also the case that the general consensus about people who know something about this is that we're not teaching any courses dealing with management.
Okay.
Public policy schools have figured they were doing management when they were teaching economics. Well, they're not teaching, that's not, economics may be part of it, but that's not the whole of management. And so we claim to be a place where people who want to go into the running of nonprofits and foundations and government, and yet the courses that we're offering do not address the main thing that people who are in government and those organizations do, which is make decisions. And so I figured that's something that needed to have something done about it too.
Okay. Okay.
And that's another major project because that is coming along okay.
Okay. Okay. That's great. Well, one final question as Duke moves into its second century. What are your hopes for Duke as you look to the future?
Well, I want more of the same, but I want it diverse. No, I mean, I think when you look at the past 50 years, a lot has happened at Duke. And we've talked about some of those things. And Duke has an openness to new things, and I want to see even more new things here. And, I think you're seeing it in the activities of students when they go abroad in a way, at a level that they've never done before. And they will often get more abroad learning than in the past, than they ever did in the past, actually. So I think that the administration has been steadily getting better in dealing with these problems. It used to be that the university administrations didn't deal with them. My sense is that President Price is doing taking wonderful leadership, as he demonstrates he and his team have done with respect to the demonstrations, with respect to Israel and the Palestinians. No university has done that particular kind of problem justice to the extent that we have.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you, Joel, for your time, your insights, and I believe as we look back over Duke history, you've named Terry Sanford so much that there will be many who name Joel Fleishman in the history of Duke as one of the luminaries. So it's been a pleasure.
You're kind.
Okay, so thank you.
Well, it's my pleasure indeed. Wonderful to see you again.
Likewise.
And good luck
Thank you.
in your own work.
Thank you.